I was lying on the floor as my dad stood over me, holding my wooden crutch. The whole room had gone silent. After years of working 2 jobs to support my family, I finally realized they never loved me. They only needed my money. Then I saw flashing lights outside the house, and I knew their lives were about to change forever, but they still had no idea what was coming next. My name is Emily. I'm 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I lived my life by a very simple, unwritten rule. Family comes first. In my mind, being a good daughter meant carrying whatever weight was placed on your shoulders, no matter how heavy it got, and doing it without a single word of complaint. I was raised in Chicago, Illinois, in a household where love wasn't something you just received. It was something you had to earn, over and over again, through endless sacrifice. I was the eldest child, the quiet one, the one who always cleaned up the messes others left behind. If the rent was short, I found a way. If the fridge was empty, I made sure there was food on the table, even if my own plate stayed empty. I grew up believing that if I just worked hard enough, if I was just selfless enough, one day my parents would look at me and see me, truly see me, not just as a human ATM or a safety net, but as their daughter. I wanted to hear them say they were proud of me. I wanted to feel like I belonged in my own home rather than just being the person who paid for it. But looking back, I realize how incredibly naive I was. My patience wasn't seen as strength, it was seen as permission. My silence wasn't respected, it was exploited. I lived in a house with 3 other adults, yet I was entirely alone. My father, Robert, my mother, Sarah, and my 22-year-old brother, Jacob, lived their lives in a completely different reality. One where their comfort was a basic human right, and my sole purpose in life was to fund it. I didn't see the warning signs because I didn't want to. When you love people, you build excuses for them. You tell yourself that your father is just stressed, that your mother is just trying to keep the peace, and that your brother is just young and finding his way. But there is a very fine line between helping the people you love and enabling the very behavior that will eventually destroy you. I spent years crossing that line every single day, pouring my life, my youth, and my energy into a cup that had a massive hole at the bottom. I was drowning myself just to keep them dry, completely blind to the fact that the moment I started to slip, they wouldn't just watch me fall, they would be the ones to push me. My daily life was a never-ending cycle of exhaustion. Every single morning, my alarm would go off at exactly 6:30 a.m. My body would ache, my eyes would burn, and every muscle would scream at me to just stay in bed for 5 more minutes, but I couldn't. If I didn't get up, the fragile house of cards we lived in would fall apart. By 8 a.m., I had to be at my first job, working as a receptionist at a busy dental clinic in downtown Chicago. For 8 hours, I sat at that desk, answering phone calls, scheduling appointments, dealing with angry patients, and filing endless insurance paperwork. I forced a polite smile onto my face for 40 hours a week, hiding the bone-deep tiredness that was already starting to settle into my spirit. But when 4 p.m. came, my workday wasn't over. While my coworkers talked about going home to make dinner, go to the gym, or meet up with friends, I had to run to the nearest subway station. I had exactly 1 hour to get across the city to my second job. From 5 p.m. until midnight, I worked as a cashier at a local 24-hour supermarket. By the time my shift ended at 12 a.m., my feet would be swollen, my back would be stiff from standing on the hard linoleum floor, and my mind would be completely numb. I would catch the last train home, walking through the quiet Chicago streets in the dark, only to crawl into bed at 1 a.m., knowing I had to do the exact same thing all over again in just 5 hours. I did this 6 days a week. Why? Because the financial weight of our entire household was resting entirely on my shoulders. Our rent for the Chicago apartment was $2,400 a month. On top of that, there were electric bills, water bills, gas bills, high-speed internet, car insurance, and groceries. In total, it cost over $4,500 every single month just to keep our family afloat. And every single dollar of that came directly from my 2 paychecks. My father, Robert, didn't contribute a single penny. He hadn't held a steady job in over 6 years. He claimed his back was too bad to work, but his back was perfectly fine when he wanted to spend hours walking around the neighborhood or going out to meet his buddies. He spent his days sitting on our living room couch, watching sports on the expensive TV I paid for, and complaining. If I came home after a 14-hour workday and the house wasn't clean, or if there wasn't a fresh, hot meal waiting for him, he would scream at me. He would tell me I was a lazy, useless daughter who didn't know how to take care of her family. He demanded expensive meals, premium cable packages, and brand name clothes, completely ignoring the fact that his daughter was working herself to death to pay for them. Then there was my 22-year-old brother, Jacob. Jacob was the golden child. He was young, healthy, and fully capable of working, but he refused to even look for a job. My mother, Sarah, had completely spoiled him his entire life. Jacob spent his days and nights locked in his bedroom, playing video games on a custom-built computer that he had pressured my mother into making me buy for him. He would sleep until 2 p.m., wake up, eat the food I bought, and go back to his games. Whenever I tried to suggest that Jacob should get a part-time job at a local coffee shop or grocery store to help with the bills, my mother would instantly shut me down. "How can you be so selfish, Emily?" Sarah would say, looking at me with deep disappointment. "Jacob is still trying to find himself. He is your younger brother. You should be supporting him, not trying to force him into a dead-end job. You're his older sister. It is your job to protect him." The emotional manipulation was constant. I was gaslit into believing that asking for help was a sign of greed and selfishness. So I kept my mouth shut. I swallowed my anger, put my head down, and kept working. But I had one secret. It was the only thing that kept me going during those long, miserable night shifts at the supermarket. Over 5 long years of sacrificing my health, my social life, and my happiness, I had managed to quietly save up $30,000. It wasn't easy. I had to skip meals, walk instead of taking public transit when I could, and deny myself even the smallest luxuries. I kept this money in a private savings account that none of them knew existed. It was my lifesaver. It was my ticket out of that toxic household, my dream of one day buying a small place of my own where I could finally breathe. I guarded that secret with my life, knowing that if my family ever found out about it, they would find a way to bleed me dry. I had no idea that my secret was about to be put to the ultimate test in the most brutal way possible. It was a Tuesday night in late October, and Chicago was being hit by a relentless, freezing autumn rain. I remember the clock on the supermarket wall showing 11:45 p.m. My hands were shaking from physical exhaustion, and my head felt incredibly heavy. I had been suffering from a mild fever all day, but I couldn't afford to call in sick. A missed shift meant missing a portion of the rent, and my family never tolerated a delay in the bills. When my shift finally ended at midnight, I dragged my feet out to my old, battered sedan. The rain was coming down so hard that the windshield wipers could barely keep up, and the roads were slick, dangerous, and dark. I was only 10 minutes away from our apartment, driving slowly down a quiet 4-lane avenue when it happened. Out of nowhere, a massive commercial delivery truck blew straight through a red light at a major intersection. I didn't even have time to scream. I remember the blinding flash of his headlights illuminating the interior of my car, followed by a deafening, metallic crunch as the truck smashed directly into my driver's side door. The force of the impact spun my car across 3 lanes of traffic before it slammed into a concrete utility pole. When I finally opened my eyes, the world was spinning. The smell of burning rubber, gasoline, and deployed airbags filled the air. There was an excruciating, sharp pain radiating from my right leg, so intense that it made me gasp for air. I couldn't move. I was trapped in the crumpled metal of my own car, crying out in the dark, shivering from both the cold rain pouring through the shattered window and the sheer terror of the moment. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens grew closer, and firefighters had to use the jaws of life to cut me out of the wreckage. I woke up hours later in a bright, sterile room at the Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The constant, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor was the only sound. My head was bandaged, and my entire right leg was encased in a thick, heavy plaster cast elevated by a pulley system. Soon, the orthopedic surgeon walked in with a grim expression. He explained that my femur and tibia had suffered severe fractures. They had to perform an emergency surgery to insert metal rods and screws to stabilize the bone. "You're lucky to be alive, Emily," the doctor said gently, checking my vitals. "But you won't be walking on that leg for a long time. You're going to be completely dependent on crutches for at least the next 3 to 4 months, and you'll need intensive physical therapy." As soon as the doctor left, the reality of my situation hit me, and panic set in. I was in pain, terrified, and completely alone. I reached for my cracked phone on the bedside table. My hands shook as I dialed my mother's number. I just wanted to hear her voice. I wanted her to tell me that everything was going to be okay and that they were on their way to hold my hand. The phone rang 4 times before Sarah finally answered. The background was incredibly loud. I could hear upbeat party music, people laughing, and the clinking of glasses. "Mom?" I sobbed, tears instantly streaming down my face. "Mom, I was in a horrible car accident last night. I'm at the hospital. I had to have emergency surgery on my leg and I can't walk. Please, can you and Dad come? I'm so scared." There was a brief silence on the line, followed by a heavy, annoyed sigh. "Emily, seriously." My mother's voice was cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of sympathy. "Do you always have to make everything about yourself? Today is Jacob's 22nd birthday. We have over 30 guests here. Your father has been grilling food all morning, and we are in the middle of celebrating. We can't just abandon our guests because you had a little fender bender." "Mom, it wasn't a fender bender," I cried out, my voice cracking in disbelief. "My car is completely destroyed. I have metal rods in my leg. I can't even stand up. Please, I need you." "Stop being so dramatic, Emily," she snapped, her tone hardening. "If you're well enough to call and complain, you're well enough to take care of yourself. The doctors are there, aren't they? Just pay your bill, take a taxi home, and don't ruin your brother's special day. We'll see you when you get here." Before I could say another word, she hung up. I stared at the blank screen of my phone, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like a cruel joke. The silence of that hospital room pressed down on my chest until I could barely breathe. For 3 agonizing days, I stayed in that hospital bed. Not once did my mother call back to check if I was alive. Not once did my father text me. Not once did Jacob ask how I was doing. They didn't care about the pain I was in. They only cared that I wasn't there to serve them. I managed my own discharge paperwork, paid the expensive medical deductibles myself, and hobbled out of the hospital entrance on a pair of cheap wooden crutches, completely alone. As I dragged my broken body into the back of a yellow taxi, a cold, dark realization began to take root in my chest. The girl who would do anything for her family died in that car crash. The taxi ride back to our Chicago apartment was the longest, most painful ride of my life. Every bounce of the car sent a sharp, agonizing jolt straight up my fractured leg. By the time the taxi pulled up to the curb of our building, I was drenched in a cold sweat. It was still raining, a miserable gray drizzle that matched the emptiness in my chest. I dragged myself out of the back seat, my hands slipping on the wet metal of the cheap wooden crutches the hospital had given me. I had to lift my entire body weight with my arms, dragging my heavy plaster-cast leg across the wet pavement. Nobody was waiting at the door to help me. Nobody came down the stairs. As I struggled up the 3 flights of stairs to our apartment, my shoulders bruising with every step against the wooden crutches, I could already hear the thumping bass of the music. The walls were literally vibrating. When I finally reached our door, my chest was heaving and my eyes were stinging with tears of sheer exhaustion. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The apartment was packed. There were at least 30 people, our neighbors, some of my father's drinking buddies, and Jacob's friends, all laughing, drinking, and eating food that I had paid for. The living room was decorated with expensive streamers and balloons. Right in the middle of it all was Jacob, wearing a brand new designer jacket, holding a drink and laughing loudly. The moment I hobbled into the entryway, a sudden silence fell over the front of the room. People turned to look at me, staring at my heavily bandaged head, my swollen face, and my legs suspended in a massive plaster cast. For a split second, I thought someone would show a shred of human decency. I thought my mother would run over to hug me, or my father would ask if I was okay. Instead, my father, Robert, raised his beer bottle in the air and laughed loudly so the entire room could hear. "Well, look who finally decided to join the party," he shouted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Our clumsy cripple princess has returned. What's the matter, Emily? Did you decide to get into an accident just so you could skip out on helping your mother clean up? Walk carefully, everyone. We don't want her tripping over her own feet and ruining Jacob's birthday cake." A few of his buddies snickered. Jacob didn't even look up from his phone. My mother, Sarah, just shook her head, walking past me with a tray of drinks without even making eye contact. The sheer, naked cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. I stood there, leaning heavily on my crutches, my body shaking not from pain, but from a sudden, blinding realization. These people didn't see me as a daughter or a sister. To them, I was nothing but an animal meant to carry their burdens until my bones broke. But my father wasn't done. He walked over to me, smelling of beer and grilled meat, and forcefully grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the kitchen hallway, away from the center of the room, but still completely within earshot of the guests. "Listen to me," Robert muttered, his eyes narrowing. "I know about the money. I found a bank statement in the mail last week. You've been hiding $30,000 in a private savings account while we struggle to get by. What kind of a selfish, ungrateful daughter does that?" My heart stopped. The secret I had guarded for 5 years, my only lifeline, had been exposed. "That is my money, Dad," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I worked 14 hours a day for 5 years to save that. I earned every single cent of it." "I don't care how you got it," he hissed, leaning in close. "Today is your brother's 22nd birthday. As his older sister, it is your absolute duty to make sure he is set up for the future. You are going to log into your bank app right now, and you are going to transfer that $30,000 directly to Jacob's account. Consider it his birthday gift. He deserves to have a real savings, and you don't need it anyway, since you're just going to be sitting around the house healing for the next few months." He spoke with such absolute arrogant certainty. He truly believed that because he was my father, he owned my body, my labor, and my future. And in that exact moment, something inside me snapped. The paralyzing fear, the desperate need for their approval, the guilt that they had weaponized against me for my entire life, it all vanished. In its place, a freezing, immovable wave of anger took over. I looked at Robert's greedy face, then looked past him at Jacob, who was stuffing his face with cake, and my mother, who was smiling at him. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I stood as straight as I could on my crutches, took a deep breath, and spoke in a voice that was so loud, so clear, and so incredibly calm that it sliced right through the loud music and silenced the entire apartment. "I am not giving Jacob a single solitary dime," I announced. The music suddenly felt incredibly loud as everyone stopped talking. Every eye in the room turned to us. "What did you just say to me?" Robert's face turned an ugly, dark shade of red, his fists clenching at his sides. "I said no," I repeated, looking around the room, making eye contact with our neighbors and family friends. "I pay every single dollar of rent for this apartment. I pay the electric bills, the groceries, the insurance, and the food you are all eating right now. I work 2 jobs, 14 hours a day, while my brother sits in his bedroom playing video games and my father drinks on the couch. And when I was nearly killed in a car accident 3 days ago, not a single person in this family came to the hospital. They told me I was ruining Jacob's birthday. And now you want me to hand over my life savings to a lazy, grown man who has never worked a day in his life? No. The free ride is officially over." The silence that followed my words was suffocating. For a second, nobody breathed. The neighbors and family friends stared at my father, then at my brother, and finally at me, standing there bruised, bandaged, and broken, yet refusing to back down. Robert's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He had spent his entire life dominating this household, commanding my obedience through guilt and fear. To be exposed as a parasite in front of his friends, his neighbors, and his pampered son was a humiliation he could not stomach. "You ungrateful, selfish little brat," Robert roared. Before anyone could react, he lunged forward. His hand flew out and violently ripped my left wooden crutch right out from under my arm. Without the support, my balance vanished. I gasped, flailing, but before I could fall, Robert swung the heavy wooden crutch like a baseball bat. Crack. The solid wood connected directly with the side of my head. The force of the blow was deafening. Pain exploded behind my eyes as my vision went entirely white. I crashed heavily onto the hardwood floor, my fractured right leg twisting beneath me, sending a fresh wave of blinding agony through my body. I lay there, clutching my head as warm, sticky blood began to pour from my temple, pooling onto the floor. "Robert, stop!" someone screamed. The living room erupted into absolute chaos. Music was abruptly shut off. Women were shrieking, and chairs scraped loudly against the floor as guests scrambled backward in terror. My mother stood frozen near the kitchen, her hands over her mouth, while Jacob stared wide-eyed, finally getting off his seat but doing absolutely nothing to help me. But the guests weren't silent. "He's out of his mind! He's going to kill her!" a neighbor yelled. Right in front of me, I saw our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Miller, holding up her phone, recording the entire scene. Her hands shook, but she kept the camera pointed directly at my father, who was still panting, holding the blood-stained crutch. Another guest, a young guy from down the hall, rushed to the corner of the room, frantically pressing his phone to his ear. "Yes, I need police and an ambulance immediately," he screamed into the receiver. "A man just assaulted his daughter with a crutch. She's bleeding from her head. She's disabled. Please, hurry. The address is—" Robert slowly realized what he had done. The rage in his eyes flickered, replaced by a sudden, desperate panic as he looked at the dozens of phones pointed at him. He dropped the crutch. It clattered loudly next to my head. Within less than 7 minutes, the sharp, wailing sirens of Chicago police cruisers and an ambulance cut through the rainy night, their red and blue lights flashing violently against the living room walls. The door was kicked open. 3 police officers rushed in, followed by paramedics who immediately knelt by my side, pressing gauze to my bleeding head and stabilizing my neck. "Who did this?" the lead officer demanded, his hand resting on his holster. Mrs. Miller didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, handing her phone directly to the officer. "He did," she said, pointing a shaking finger at Robert. "It's all right here on video. He attacked his own daughter while she was already on crutches." The officer watched the video for less than 5 seconds. His face hardened. He marched straight over to my father, grabbed his arms, and forced them behind his back. Click. The sound of the metal handcuffs locking around Robert's wrists was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. As they dragged my father out of the apartment in front of all his silent, horrified guests, I looked up from the stretcher. I didn't shed a single tear. I knew with absolute certainty that he was never going to hurt me again. The legal system in Illinois did not show my father any mercy. With Mrs. Miller's crystal-clear cell phone video and the eyewitness statements of over 20 party guests, the prosecution had an open and shut case. Under Illinois law, my father was charged with aggravated battery with a deadly weapon and domestic violence. Because I was already temporarily disabled and using medical crutches when he attacked me, the judge treated his actions with extreme severity. Robert was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. While he was being processed into a cell, I was busy rebuilding my life from the ground up. I refused to let my mother or brother into my hospital room during my recovery. The moment I was discharged, I used my $30,000 savings to sign a lease on a beautiful sunlit 1-bedroom apartment on the north side of Chicago, far away from the toxicity of my old life. I blocked their numbers, changed my social media, and left them behind without leaving a forwarding address. Without my double income to pay the $2,400 monthly rent and utility bills, my mother and Jacob's comfortable world evaporated. Jacob, of course, refused to get a job, and my mother's meager part-time earnings couldn't cover a fraction of their expenses. Within exactly 3 months, their landlord legally evicted them, throwing all of Jacob's expensive gaming gear and their furniture onto the pavement. Last month, as I was walking out of a grocery store near my new home, completely healed and walking on my own 2 feet again, I saw them. My mother looked exhausted, her clothes worn, and Jacob stood beside her, looking disheveled and defeated. They had tracked me down through a distant relative. "Emily, please," my mother wept, grabbing my arm. "We are living in a temporary shelter. We have nothing. Your brother is starving. Please, let us come live with you. We are family." I looked at her, then at my brother, the golden boy who still couldn't look me in the eye. I gently but firmly pulled my arm away from her grasp. "You had a daughter who would have given her life for you," I said calmly. "But you chose to destroy her for a parasite. Have a good life, Sarah." I turned my back on them and walked away into the crisp Chicago air, completely free, completely independent, and finally at peace.